Good afternoon. I'm very grateful to Gillian for giving me a chance to spend a few minutes showing you how the Neue Schüler Academy is attempting to bring education in bitting up to the standard that it is achieving already in saddle fitting, and also how this knowledge can impact on our approach as a community to the social license to operate. So I hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you. There's been a recognition recently that the way we treat horses and the way we interact with them is something of concern to the wider public, not only ourselves within the industry or the sport. And it's against this backdrop of the social license to operate that is the catchword of the moment, really, that this talk is set in context. And it's really to do with education within our own sport and then the wider dissemination of education outside of it to the general public, perhaps to support and uphold the idea of horse welfare to the general public. Once we start interacting with animals in something like sport, there's always the danger from a whole range of areas that there could be conflicts in our approach. For instance, commercial demands and marketing, of course, from commercial actors, and our riders themselves, who may be inexperienced and fearful, and thereby over-controlling or overbearing on their horse, or just ambition, which of course is always a threat. Ambition often related in the professional sports to money, and this can be a threat to equine welfare. It's been recognised. In saddle research, the saddle research undertaken in part by the Saddle Research Trust, this has largely been overcome and is being explained. But in bits, there is still, even within our own sport, a lot of disquiet, ignorance perhaps, and misinformation about how bits work. And it's to try to rationalise that and provide a sensible, rational front to bitting that will help us explain bitting in the context of the social licence to operate. So within bitting, one of the challenges we still have to some extent, I mean, we hope that it's gradually going away, is the adoption of tradition and the carrying through of ideas from traditional standpoints. And traditional standpoints have been there for all sorts of reasons. Sometimes they're commercial and sometimes they're just embedded ideas from people's experience. And when you want to try to rationalise bitting, as we're trying to do in Lawrenry science, there is resistance to that in some cases. And so we do come across a certain amount of inertia in the area of bitting, tendency to remain the same or do nothing. And then, of course, we have a rather more scientific definition in the second line of this slide. And really, we therefore have too few riders and people involved in the industry who are equipped to take this as a science and understand it from that point of view. And it's much easier to sit with a traditional view because it's much easier often to understand, even if it's wrong. So we've introduced the idea of Lawrenry science, and the emphasis on the second word science necessarily, I'm afraid, means that there is the application of mathematics to it in some form or other. And in the case of bitting, the mathematics is in the way of forces and these sort of things that requires you to look at it from a mathematical point of view, and this immediately cuts off huge volumes of people from wanting to know how it works. So we often hear, I've never needed maths at school and proud of it really, and this sort of thing. And the problem then, if you avoid the mathematics and you go back to hand-waving arguments, is that there can be incorrect concepts passed from person to person without any justification. And I give you an example of the nutcracker action in the final line here. And there's an example where it's completely impossible for a bit to hit the pallet if it's being pulled away from the pallet. We've got courses online now using online content management systems, which enable us to lay out the science behind bitting and provide it to those who want to study it. And so all we can do is make these courses available, advertise them perhaps, and hope that people turn up to do them. Now, we do actually have high success rates for this. There are many people who want to study these courses, and perhaps sometimes they enroll and find the maths a little tricky, and some of the student complaints are that it is far too mathematical. But we do our best to support students in the maths. We keep the maths down to a minimum. But we offer two courses at least. The certificate, which is open to all and is at a basic level. And then the diploma, if you want to carry on further and dig in much more detail, is at a higher level and does have strict prerequisites. You really have to have performed well in the certificate course to be able to be entered into the diploma course. What's made it possible to deliver such detailed and engaging courses are online learning management systems, which can handle all your student enrollment and monitoring. And we can upload videos, particularly in mathematics, and I'll give you an example of that shortly. There are quizzes. Students can periodically through the course test themselves without penalty, multiple times, unlimited attempts to test themselves in simple quizzes. And we're able to assess students properly with single attempt examinations. My experience of education is that we're always trying to find a better way of assessing students other than examinations. We understand the pitfalls of them, but in the end we always come back to examinations, and I'm afraid they seem to be completely immovable. But enables us to issue pass, merit or distinction grade certificates to successful students. This is just to show you what a page inside the course looks like to a student. So you can see that probably most important, there's a lot of forums that students can engage in and do a bit of peer-to-peer teaching of each other, and of course the tutor can enter into those discussions to unravel things as well. So it's really just a view into that particular system. So finally, we've got a situation which can be used on our photographs of the horse. Now we need to do something to simplify the horse's head. It's not a regular shape. It's not as simple as a simple circle. It doesn't have triangles on it. But what we can do is we can construct something on there that's going to be useful. And what we can do is we can say that a line drawn along the horse's tongue into the corners of the mouth, we can define that line as the tongue line, TL, in our studies. And you know that with that line we can form a line at right angles to it. So we could form a line which is directed, if you like, directly down onto the tongue. So we've got in that situation the chance to analyse the number of degrees between one line and another one when we come to analyse the bits. But on the horse, the important thing is two lines, one line along the tongue into the corners of the mouth and another line drawn at right angles to it down onto the tongue. And these two lines, when we use trigonometry with these two lines, we'll be able to determine how much force is applied down onto the tongue compared with how much force is directed into the corners of the mouth for various values on photographs that we can measure using a protractor or something like this. So for instance, one simple example is if you're galloping along and the horse's head is stuck out the front and your hands are pretty horizontal, or the reins are pretty horizontal and really affecting the corners of the horse's mouth, you'll find that actually almost all of the bit force is directed into the corners of the mouth and hardly any down onto the tongue. That's one of the simple examples. Then we go back to a dressage situation where the head of the horse is much more vertical. You can see that that force is gradually transferred into more force on the tongue and less into the corners of the mouth as the horse's head becomes more and more towards the vertical. So we begin to see practical examples of how to determine where the forces are going during riding. So finally, we've hopefully shown that bitting really needs to be understood on a rational basis, based on science, that there are barriers. They can be a controversial technology, invasive, of course, to the horse, but they still can be the safest way to interact with our ridden horses. And once we can identify the right bit in the right hands, a very important point, that we're not providing the wrong bit in the wrong hands, then we really are able to produce a strong position based on science to support the social license to operate. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.